Two things real quick. One, apologies in advance for my voice. I have a bad sore throat right now and a bit of a cold. So, yeah, not quite the same as usual. Two, this is going to be a review for the ultimate cut. When I reviewed Dawn of the Dead, Watchmen, and Sucker Punch, I reviewed their extended cuts instead of the theatrical releases. So I thought I'd just save us all some time and just review the longer cut instead of reviewing the longer cut and the shorter cut separately. If you want to know what I think about the theatrical cut, it's still a good movie in my opinion. Thinking over, it's probably not as good as the ultimate cut, but, well, that's what I'm here to talk about. So, let's get started. The film starts with an intercut montage between the murder of Thomas and Martha Wayne, a pair of wealthy socialites in Gotham City, Illinois, and their 8-year-old son, Bruce. Running away from their funeral a few days afterward, the montage ends with the close-up on Thomas as he utters his last word,
Martha.
Bruce screams in terror as he witnesses his parents die, and we cut back to the funeral with Bruce falling into a hole in the ground and stumbling onto a bat cave. The bats swarm him, and while Bruce is initially frightened, he eventually comes to accept them and is lifted back up to the above ground, with an adult Bruce's voiceover saying,
In the dream, they took me to the light. A beautiful lie.
We then cut to a text reading, Metropolis. Mankind is introduced to the Superman. We then see Bruce landing in said city by a helicopter during the Kryptonian attack from Man of Steel, and tries to get in touch with Jack, an executive for his company, Wayne Tech. We see a street-level view of Zod's ship taken into the Phantom Zone, before cutting to Jack inside the Wayne Tech building, with Zod throwing Superman into the building a few floors below. We see Zod's heat vision start to carve into the building, with Jack still inside. Bruce runs towards the collapsing building in the hope of saving some of his employees. Upon his arrival, we meet a security guard named Wallace Keep, whose legs have been permanently damaged thanks to a steel beam falling onto them. Bruce saves the man and a little girl who just lost her mother thanks to this senseless battle. We then see Bruce comforting the little girl as he looks towards the sky to see Superman and Zod still fighting. Cut again to the Indian Ocean 18 months after the battle, with a pair of Indonesian divers recovering a large piece of a Kryptonian mineral and handing it off to a wealthy white man. We then move over to Lois Lane in Nairobi, Africa, along with her photographer Jimmy Olsen. The two of them are picked up by the soldiers of a warlord named General Amajag? I have no idea how to say it, I'm sorry. Lois interviews the general about his actions within his country in the middle of their civil war. A white man working for the general as a paid military contractor picks apart Jimmy's camera material and discovers that the photographer is really a CIA operative. Jimmy reassures the general that Lois had no involvement in this plot and is then murdered. American military forces on the ground want to rescue Lois, but the ones on the base just opt to send out a drone to destroy the general's compound. Superman flies in and destroys the drone, having opted to handle things himself. Hearing that he's coming, the contractors murder all the other soldiers at the base at the compound and burn their bodies in an attempt to frame the Man of Steel. We then cut to Washington, D.C., with a woman out of the compound speaking to a congressional committee on Superman about her family was murdered by the Man of Steel. The head of the committee, Senator June Finch of Kentucky, states that Superman should be held accountable for his actions, and that they will hold him accountable. Well, the woman questions if that's even possible. We then return to Gotham City, with a pair of cops being called in about a human trafficking case. The officers arrive on the scene to a horde of frightened women insisting they remain caged because it is still here. No, the creepy clown. No, this is his nemesis, not the creepy clown himself. One of the officers checks out the complex to see what they've been talking about. And they find a restrained man that's been beaten and bloodied. The officer then finds another man dressed like a bat hanging on the corner where the two walls meet the ceiling. The Batman escapes and the other officer joins his friend. They then inspect the man left behind and discover that this Batman branded him with his own symbol. Jesus. We return to Metropolis with Lois trying to cope with the events that happened to her in Africa, while also discovering a stray bullet that hit her journal. Lois and Clark talk a little bit about what happened, and Lois notes that hearings are now being held about Clark's actions as Superman. Clark dismisses them, saying that what's important to him about that situation is that he saved Lois and that now she's safe and alive. Lois is still worried all the same, but they agree to drop the subject for now, and focus on just being happy together. We then cut to Bruce Wayne returning home and chatting with his butler/tech guy, Alfred Pennyworth. We find out that Bruce is in fact the Batman that we saw earlier, and is also tracking the military contractor from Africa, a Russian man named Anatoly Ganitsev. Bruce mentions that he's searching as well for a man called the White Portuguese, and that he believes Anatoly may be able to lead him to them. Alfred then changes the subject to the matter of Bruce branding criminals. Bruce dismisses the topic, noting that they're both outlaw vigilantes and that this sort of thing isn't that new for them. Alfred disagrees, questioning if this is some kind of overreaction to the presence of someone like Superman, noting that such things can make a man feel powerless, and then those same feelings can turn a man from good to cruel. We then cut to Senator Finch and her colleague, Senator Barrows, at a company called LexCorp, where we meet the man himself, Alexander Lex Luthor. Lex tells a story about how his father was born and raised in East Germany, where every Saturday he and his family would have to wave flowers at their oppressive Soviet puppet of a leader, and then compares said Soviet puppet of a leader to Superman. He then explains that the mineral found in the Indian Ocean actually causes cellular degradation in Kryptonians, as demonstrated by its effects on the corpse of General Zod. Senator Finch questions the need for this, seeing as how, despite the fact that he is occasionally reckless, Superman is on their side. Lex reassures her that while that may be true, it's better to have a weapon that can kill the Kryptonian and not need it, than to need the weapon and not have it. While Senator Finch is left skeptical about Lex's proposition, Barrows proudly admits he's open to the partnership. Lex then requests three things: access to the Black Zero, the crashed ship from the Arctic, unlimited access to Zod's body, and finally, for Senator Barrows to enjoy one of his Jolly Ranchers. We then briefly see Clark watching the news, where the woman from the Superman committee talks about what she'd like to say to the Man of Steel if she could sit down with him face to face. We cut to Clark looking at the news, somewhat perplexed. We then cut back to Wallace Keep, prepping for a public stunt, and see that he was left with both legs amputated by the Metropolis attack. He arrives at the public memorial to the attack on Metropolis that commemorates Superman's help. where he climbs into the statue in the memorial and spray paints the words "False God" over the S symbol on the statue's chest. We cut back to Clark at the Daily Planet, where he sees the local news report about this, and it really doesn't help his mood at all, unfortunately. Poor guy. Clark heads out to Gotham on an assignment for the Planet's sports column, but instead he heads into the projects to ask about the African woman who lost her family because of him. A family he visits that cautions him against staying out too long, or else the Batman might catch him. We then see Bruce in an underground fight club where he's found Anatoly. He strikes up a brief chat with the man while he copies the information on his phone with some tech from Alfred. We return to the Daily Planet with Clark telling his editor, Perry White, about the Bat Vigilante in Gotham, insisting that this story be told. Perry brushes it off, commenting that Gotham City having issues with criminal elements isn't exactly anything new, or as he beautifully puts it,
wave in Gotham. Other breaking news. Water. Wet.
The debate about the Gotham story, however, is interrupted by Lois. She mentions that she spoke to an expert at a crime lab about the bullet she found in her journal, and found that it wasn't one that was found on either the black market or public ammo stores. She puts out her hypothesis that the U.S. government is arming rebel forces in Nairobi while publicly claiming support for the elected government. She then requests a trip to Washington with the purpose of pressing someone for the info, and Perry accepts her request, and then directs Clark to cover a charity banquet in Metropolis at the host's own personal request.
Probably some old charity crone who's got a thing for nerds.
Then cut to Luthor Manor with Lex chatting up Senator Finch again. The rich boy tries to break the ice by chatting about how much he loved his father and how much he misses him, and how part of him wishes that part of him hopes that if he keeps his late father's study the exact same it was before, maybe his dad will come back. Senator Finch cuts straight through all that and gets to the point. She won't grant him his import license to bring the Kryptonian mineral to the U.S. Lex accepts defeat for now, but comments that while he left his father's study exactly the way he left it before he passed away, he wonders if his father wouldn't mind if he turned over his painting of the Archangel, old Michael, casting Lucifer into hell. Because they know better now. The devils don't come from hell beneath us. They come from the sky. We then return to Bruce and his family manor, where we see him talking to Alfred as they start their day. They discuss that Anatoly does in fact know the white Portuguese, and that that Anatoly's phone has been receiving data from Lex Luthor's personal residence. Alfred notes that Bruce has the perfect excuse to visit Lex because Lex just invited him to his charity banquet in Metropolis. We finally cut to Bruce arriving at the banquet with Clark already present. Bruce surveys the area looking for Lex's private data storage spot, but is caught by Lex's assistant, Mercy. Bruce plays it off that was just being too drunk to find the stupid bathroom. He then rejoins the party to avoid suspicion while a device from Alfred collects the data from Lex. Bruce then bumps into Clark, who asks him about the Bat Vigilante in Gotham. Bruce says maybe the Batman is just trying to help people out. But Clark argues that the Vigilante thinks he's above the law. Bruce then remarks that you could easily say the same thing about Superman, and that moreover, or you could argue that an alien like Kal-el is far more dangerous than another human who picks on human traffickers in the Narrows. Their debate is interrupted by the arrival of Lex, who chats with Bruce for a moment before being pulled away to hobnob with even more important people. Bruce walks up to grab the data he just copied, but finds it missing when he returns for it, having been stolen by a mysterious woman who leaves before he can confront her. Clark, in the meantime, departs for Juarez, Mexico, to save a young woman caught in a tenement fire. This kicks off a montage of news debates intercut with Clark continually performing more and more heroic acts that ends with PBS's Charlie Rose interviewing Senator Finch, who asks her point blank,
"Must there be a Superman?"
To which she replies,
"There is."
We then cut to Clark sitting on the couch, dejectedly watching the interview, then calling his mother for some personal advice about this whole thing. We then cut to Lois at a crime lab with her friend Jeanette Clyburn, who analyzes the bullet and concludes that the metal from the bullet isn't the same as standard ammunition. We then cut to a jailhouse in Metropolis, where we see the human trafficker from earlier in the film pleading not to be put in with the other inmates, because the Bat brand is something that gets people murdered in prison. In the same jailhouse, we run into Wallace Keep again, whose bail is paid by Lex. Lex meets with Wallace at his house and offers him a new electric wheelchair and sets up a meeting between him and Senator Finch. Wallace asks the senator to call for Superman to appear at a public hearing so that he can confront the man about what his actions cost him. The senator agrees. We cut back to the human trafficker in a prison yard where he's confronted by another prisoner who stabs him repeatedly after having just been paid off by Anatoly. We then cut back to Lois in D.C., where she confronts General Swanwick, now Defense Secretary Swanwick. Lois asks why the Nairobi rebels had experimental weaponry. Swanwick brushes off the question and suggests that what Lois really wants is to find proof that Superman did nothing wrong, even if he did, technically or otherwise. We then return to the planet with Perry giving Clark a hard time for still harping on about the goddamn Batman. We then see the mysterious woman from Lex's banquet at another rich people function at a historical museum, where she's confronted by Bruce. The woman tells Bruce that she went after Bruce's drive because Lex had a picture of her that she wanted back, but she unfortunately couldn't crack the encryption on Lex's data, so she's opted to return it to Bruce, who takes it home and decrypts it himself, but falls asleep while his computer does the work. We then go to his dream, where he's in a post-apocalyptic wasteland of Metropolis, where Superman rules and monster soldiers serve him. Bruce thinks he's finally retrieved the Kryptonian mineral Lex wants, but it's all a trap set up by a turncoat member of Bruce's resistance group. Bruce tries to fight off the Superman soldiers, but is eventually subdued by one of the monsters they serve with. Bruce then awakens, still in his dream, in a dungeon where he's hung up by Superman, who tells him,
"She was my world, and you took her from me,"
before killing him. Bruce then awakens in what we think is reality at first, to a man shouting at him from inside a portal saying,
"It's Lois! Lois Lane! She's the key!"
before realizing that he's arrived too soon. He leaves, but warns Bruce that he's right about him.
You're right about him! You've always been right about him! Fear him!
Before finally pleading with him to find us. Bruce then awakens again, leaving us to wonder whether or not that was in fact a dream or something else. We then begin a montage of Bruce looking into Lex's files now that he's decrypted them, and Clark going over autopsy photos of the murdered human trafficker that Bruce branded, with the words judge, jury, executioner, justice written on them. Bruce then discovers that the White Portuguese isn't a person, but a ship. Bruce relays the info to Alfred, who confronts Bruce, suggesting that the ship isn't carrying a dirty bomb like Bruce had told him before. Bruce then admits that the ship is carrying a Kryptonian mineral that Lex wants. Bruce then tells Alfred he intends to take it for himself so that he can confront Superman and then kill him. Alfred argues there's no point in that because Superman isn't their enemy. Bruce counters that he's not their enemy yet. He notes that in their fine city, they've seen plenty of good guys turn bad, and says Superman could easily be one of those good guys that never actually stays good. We then cut to a Gotham City jailhouse where Clark is trying to talk to a staff member about the human trafficker who was murdered on Anatoly's behalf. Clark is pointed towards the man's widow, who admits that the man had it coming, but despite all that he was also a father. Clark offers to make a story for the Planet about her child's father's murder, but she questions what use that would do. A man like Batman won't be stopped because a newspaper article tells him to. He'd only be stopped by another man coming over and knocking him to the ground. We then cut to the Gotham City harbor where the Kryptonian mineral is finally being loaded onto a LexCorp truck. Bruce attempts to retrieve the mineral as Batman in a high-speed chase in his own specialized assault vehicle known as the Batmobile. But is eventually he's stopped by Superman, who politely suggests that he either retire or face the consequences. Bruce replies with a question.
Tell me. Do you bleed?
Superman leaves without answering, and Bruce declares that
You will.
Bruce returns to his base where he checks on the tracker he placed on Lex's truck to find that it's definitely stopped at a LexCorp site. We then cut to Lois talking to Secretary Swanwick again, and admits that she does want confirmation that Superman did nothing wrong, but not because she loves him, but because she knows it's out of his character and thinks that Swanwick thinks so too, or knows that too. She offers him the bullet from Africa, and he takes it to her analysis. We then move over to Capitol Hill, where we see Senator Finch publicly requests Superman appear before a congressional hearing to explain what the hell happened in that desert. We cut to the African woman from earlier in the film on a bus ride home, but when she arrives, she spots Anatoly outside her apartment. She makes the logical choice and opts to stay on the bus. We then cut to her forcing her way into Senator Finch's office and admits that her Senate testimony was a lie. We then cut back to Lois and Secretary Swanwick, where he confirms that the situation in Nairobi was indeed a setup to make Superman look bad, and also explains that the metal in the bullet was developed by LexCorp. Lois asks if Swanwick will go on the record. Swanwick replies,
"No way, Jose."
We then cut to Senator Finch talking to a colleague about what the African woman told her before bumping into Lex. We cut to Bruce in Gotham, who recognizes Wallace on television, and asks an assistant why hasn't he been receiving their checks. The assistant explains that he has, but he's just kept sending them back with more and more bizarre messages. We cut to the African woman at a subway station in D.C., where Anatoly follows her and pushes her onto the rails as a train arrives. We then cut to Superman's arrival on Capitol Hill and the hearing begins. Senator Finch makes her opening statement, but starts to lose her cool when she realizes Luthor isn't in the chamber, and on the counter there isn't a glass of water, but a jar labeled Granny's Peach Tea, a reference to her earlier conversation with Lex, where she told him,
Call me whatever you like. Take a bucket of piss and call it Granny's peach tea. Take a weapon of assassination and call it deterrence. You won't fool a fly or me. I'm not gonna drink it.
The senator looks out in horror, and we cut to Wallace in his wheelchair immediately before it explodes, killing every person in the room, save for Superman. We then cut back to Bruce in Gotham, where he reads Wallace's final message, a newspaper clipping with the headline, "Wayne Tower Devastated," with Wallace having written over it saying, "You let your family die!" We come back to DC, where we see Superman helping people who survived the explosion out of the Capitol building before taking off once everyone was safe. We cut back to Metropolis with Lex discovering that Batman's finally stolen his mineral. We then move back to DC with Superman admitting to Lois that he couldn't see the bomb, and that he's worried that he may not have been able to see it because he just didn't want to see it. He then admits he's not even sure if there's any point in being Superman anymore. Lois argues that to some people, Superman is all that gives them hope. Clark admits he's not so sure anymore and flies off. We then cut to Lex using Zod's fingerprints to enter the Black Zero. The ship's AI asks if Lex would like to assume command, and he says yes, he would. And then begins to learn about Kryptonian culture, as well as the cultures of millions of other intergalactic cultures. We then move back to Bruce, who has started training to prepare for his fight with Superman. Yes, you heard that right. The crazy rich man wants to pick a fight with an alien that can pull an ocean liner and hold up a space rocket over his head with only a little bit of strain. At the same time, he's also started developing more tools to face the Man of Steel, like a spear made from the Kryptonian mineral. He's also decided to look into what else is in Lex's files, and finds 4 other files on metahumans, one of which is the woman he met back at the museum. Bruce wonders why she'd be here, and then finds out. On her file, there's a black and white photo of her in ancient Greek armor with 4 other men. Said photo is dated as November of 1918. We return to Lex on the Black Zero, where he's begun an experiment where he combines his DNA with Zod's body in order to create a new life form. An experiment which the ship's AI strongly advises against, citing Kryptonian law. Lex asks what happened to Krypton. The AI concedes that Krypton was destroyed and proceeds with the experiment while bearing a heavy virtual heart. We then cut to Lois, looking through Wallace Keep's apartment to see what he was up to before the bombing, and notices that he had just stocked up on groceries, leading her to realize
he didn't know he was gonna die.
Lois then contacts Jeanette again, who tells her that Wallace's electronic wheelchair and the bullet from Africa were made from the same metal. But she also mentions that the inside of the bomb was lined with lead. Lois then realizes this is exactly why Clark couldn't see the bomb, because X-rays can't penetrate lead. We then see Clark hiking in the mountains, where he imagines or hallucinates a conversation with his father, Jonathan. He tells a story to Clark about how when he was 12, there was a bad rainstorm that was going to flood the farm. So Jonathan and his family worked all night to set up a system to redirect the water away from the farm. Jonathan's family was so proud of him in particular, or his mother even called him a hero and baked him a cake as a reward. Only to later find out that they'd unknowingly directed the water to another farm that flooded their land. and led to their horses drowning, while Jonathan ate his hero cake. He admits that he always used to dream about it before he met Martha, but that Martha, his wife, made him realize that there was good in the world. We then cut to Alfred confronting Bruce inside the long-destroyed Wayne mansion. Alfred says this mission is suicide. Bruce shrugs it off, noting that he is now older than his father was when he died. And all the same, if he does accomplish what he set out to do, it may be the only meaningful thing he has ever done. Alfred notes that Bruce has spent 20 years cleaning up the streets of Gotham. That's pretty meaningful. Bruce brushes it off as well, noting that for every one criminal you take off the street, another one will take his or her place. But if you kill Superman, there won't be another one. That'll be it, and the world will be safe. Alfred admits defeat and quietly mourns that this will be the end of the Wayne family line.
So falls the House of Wayne.
We then cut back to Kansas with Martha being abducted. We then return to Gotham with Bruce turning on the bat signal to alert Superman. We cut to across the bay with Lex in Metropolis informing Anatoly that Lois just arrived home from D.C., who was then abducted and then dropped on top of the LexCorp tower in front of Lex himself. Lois informs Lex that she knows exactly what he's been up to, but Lex doesn't seem to care. Lex states it is his belief that the best way to get Superman's attention, to get to the person he really wants to talk to, is to put Lois in danger, like pushing her off a building. And like clockwork, Superman does in fact save her before flying up to face Lex. Lex compares Superman to God and refers to him by his full Christian name. No, not Kal-El. His real name.
Because that's what God is. Horus, Apollo, Jehovah, Kal-El, Clark, Joseph, Kent.
Lex gives Clark a spiel about his own life, noting that despite all the virtues people ascribe to God, he never acted in his benefit.
Clark Joe. Because God is tribal. God takes sides. No man in the sky intervened when I was a boy to deliver me from Daddy's fist and abominations.
Which led him to this conclusion.
God is all-powerful. He cannot be all good. And if he is all good, then he cannot be all-powerful.
Lex then issues a challenge to Clark. Kill Batman and bring his head back, or let his mother die. Clark is infuriated when he realizes that Lex has kidnapped his mom, but agrees to face Bruce. But before we cut to our big prize fight between the Man of Steel and the Dark Knight, we see the mysterious woman from the banquet and the museum in her hotel room, receiving a message from Bruce containing her photo, as well as the other metahuman files from Lex's drive. Said files are of a young man who stops a robbery at a gas station by moving with superhuman speed, underwater footage of a tattooed man with long hair and fish eyes who destroys an exploration probe and then swims off with immense speed as well. And finally, we have a video diary from a scientist named Dr. Silas Stone, who saves his son's life by applying extraterrestrial technology to his mostly destroyed body. We cut once again, but this time to Lois heading off to Gotham to stop Clark from killing Batman, or vice versa. And finally, after 2 hours, 2 minutes, and 58 seconds of movie, we arrive at the moment fans have waited for since the 4th issue of Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns was released in June 1986. Superman fights Batman. We start with Clark pleading with Bruce to hear him out for just a couple minutes, but Bruce just keeps triggering more and more traps that he'd set up in preparation for the fight. Clark doesn't take kindly to any of this and knocks him back once he disables them, then grabs the stupid bat jerk and shoves him into a building and tossing him through the ceiling and onto the roof. He shouts for him to just stay down, knowing that if he wanted to kill Bruce, he could have done it a lot sooner. Bruce ignores that too and sets off a smoke bomb. Clark evades it easily, but it was only a distraction that allowed Bruce to fire a gas pellet at him filled with an aerosol version of the Kryptonian mineral, which immediately weakens Clark. The Man of Steel tries to throw another punch at the Dark Knight, but without his incredible speed and strength, Clark's non-existent fighting skills betray him against his much more seasoned opponent. Their fight goes on, with Clark slowly regaining his strength until he's strong enough to tank Bruce's hits and then teach him some manners. Clark only gets part of the way through his lesson plan, though, when Bruce hits him with another Kryptonian gas can and prepares to deliver the coup de grace with his Kryptonian glass spear. But before he can kill him, Clark uses his last breath to ask Bruce to save his mother, referring to her by name, Martha. Bruce is confused at his request, since his late mother's name was also Martha. Bruce becomes even more infuriated by this and shouts at Clark, demanding to know why the hell he said that name. Lois arrives before Bruce can finally kill Clark and tells him that Martha is his mother's name. Bruce walks away from Clark and Lois and quietly mulls over his actions, before realizing he just can't do it anymore. If this evil alien with his last breath is going to ask his would-be executioner to save his mother, then can he really be so evil? Bruce tosses his spear and helps Clark back to his feet. Clark explains why he even came to see Bruce, and Lois mentions that the ship is starting to draw power from the Metropolis grid. Bruce tells Clark to go to the ship while he heads off to rescue Martha. Superman reluctantly agrees and heads off, while Bruce heads for the Gotham Harbor and does what he does best. Kick some serious ass. In the midst of the commotion, Anatoly has one of his thugs point his gun at the door in anticipation of Batman's arrival. But Batman just breaks through the drywall and takes the bastard's weapon. Anatoly shouts at Batman to drop it, insisting that he'll burn Martha alive if he doesn't. Bruce opts to just shoot the tank of his flamethrower and protect Martha with his body. Meanwhile, Lois opts to chuck the spear into a small water tank inside the building so that it can't be used against Clark again. Clark arrives at the ship and confronts Lex again. Lex assumes he's won and calls up Anatoly to confirm Martha's dead, but instead is greeted by Bruce, who confirms Martha's safety. Lex refuses to admit defeat, however, and summons his Kryptonian abomination, calling it Superman's Doomsday. While Superman is temporarily unable to fight, the military intervenes, shooting at it with missiles from Apache helicopters. The missiles only piss the monster off, though, leading it to unleash a blast of energy from its body that destroys the copters and a small chunk of Metropolis. As the battle between Clark and the monster resumes, we make a brief cut to the mysterious woman again, about to take off for a flight to Paris. But seeing the news, she realizes she just can't leave. She has to help. Clark opts to fly the monster into outer space. The president, however, authorizes a nuclear strike to finish the monster off for good. In hindsight, that probably wasn't a good idea. The creature lands back on Earth and only absorbs the energy, becoming even stronger and more dangerous than before. Superman, however, is left severely depowered by the blast floating in space waiting to be repowered by the sun's energy. Meanwhile, Bruce opts to trick the Beast into chasing him back to Gotham so he can kill it with the Kryptonite Spear, as Bruce called it.
Kryptonian. Only kryptonite weapons can kill it.
Thank Christ, someone finally said it. Someone finally said the damn word. Thank you. Thank you, DC Comics Jesus, thank you. Oh, sorry about that. Bruce is eventually shot down by the monster, but is saved by Miss Prince, a mysterious woman Bruce kind of sort of befriended. Miss Prince blasts the monster back by slamming her bracelets together, and Superman flies in and smacks him even further back. Oh yeah, Superman's back. The new Trinity, he has some quick banter and get ready for one hell of a fight, knowing that someone's gonna need that damn spear if they're gonna kill that fucking thing. Lois opts to try and retrieve the spear before it's too late. Unfortunately, some of the rubble from the fight covers the tank, and Lois is trapped until Clark can come to save her. Clark then retrieves the spear and bids Lois farewell before flying off to destroy the monster while it's still restrained by Miss Prince's lasso and weakened by Batman's last kryptonite gas grenade. Unfortunately, Miss Prince had also just cut off the Beast's right hand a moment earlier, which led to the Beast growing a large spike in its place. The monster impales Clark with it, leading to them killing each other. Lois mourns the loss of her lover, while Bruce and Miss Prince look on with remorse. We then cut back to the Black Zero, with a SWAT team venturing in to arrest Lex for treason, kidnapping, and crimes against humanity. They find the billionaire talking to another monster who shows him 3 different cubes before disappearing. Lex then turns to face the police officers and is taken in. A few days later, 2 separate funerals are held. One in honor of the Man of Steel who died saving the world for the umpteenth time, attended by the Secretary of Defense and a major in the U.S. Army, and people from all over the world. And one for the simple reporter who died in the midst of all the chaos, attended by friends, family, and co-workers, as well as 2 total strangers who just wanted to pay their respects to a good man they once met at a party. And to add insult to this painful injury, Martha gives Lois a ring that Clark had sent home to surprise her. He was going to propose. Fuck you, Zack Snyder. Thank you for everything before this moment and after it, but fuck you so much for this moment, man. You can't play with my emotions like that. Bruce and Miss Prince talk, with the former vowing that out of respect for Clark and all that he stood for, he's going to be a better man from this point forward. He also asks Miss Prince to help him find other people with powers in the event of an attack from beyond Earth arrives. Miss Prince asks what he means by that, and Bruce dismisses it as
just a feeling.
Before we flash back to Bruce's Batman confronting Lex in his prison cell. Lex tells Bruce that he intends to plead insanity to avoid execution. Bruce figured as much and arranged for him to be transferred to one of the less savory mental health institutions, Arkham Asylum. And if you know as much about Batman lore as I've pretended not to here, you know that's not somewhere you want to go if you've done something bad. Lex doesn't let this get to him, though, and notes that,
but the bell's already been rung, and they've heard it out in the dark among the stars. Ding dong. The god is dead.
We then cut to Luther's study, where he has indeed turned over his painting to show Lucifer defeating Michael. We then return to Clark's funeral with Lois tossing a handful of dirt onto her beloved's casket, and she quietly leaves. We then cut back to that casket, with the dirt Lois just laid on it, starting to float, just the same as right before Superman lifts off. And credits roll. Pros. I'll admit, back in August 2013, I wasn't wild about the idea of Ben Affleck as Batman. But then I saw a clip from The Town and I thought, okay, this could work. And then I saw the movie and I went,
But that was awesome.
He plays the dumb playboy angle to a T. When he's caught at Lex's party by Mercy, every single thing he says is exactly what you can picture any dumb, rich douche nozzle saying. And yet he can still believably play the more composed Bruce Wayne, like when he's talking to Alfred or Diana, or when he's debating with Clark about Batman and Superman. And as Batman, you can feel those toxic levels of hate and anger. His little smirk when Clark finally shows up just says it all. You know he's ready to kick some ass, and he's gonna have all kinds of fun showing this stupid alien who's boss. But at the same time, you actually still feel the actual compassion that you can sometimes forget Bruce Wayne has. We all saw that scene from the trailers where we saw him comforting a little girl in the wreckage of Wayne Tower. But I like how that's not the only time we see how much he cares about people. We see him go out of his way to help Wallace, not just by taking the beam off his legs, but also by regularly sending him money to pay for his bills. And I like how, after what had happened with Superman, not only does he realize he was wrong, but he actually tries to correct the way he lives.
I failed him. In life. I won't fail him in death.
He realizes that you can't just live your life fueled by the need for vengeance. You can't live your life expecting the worst out of everyone. You have to leave room for the hope for a better world. Otherwise, you'll end up like the last guy who played Batman.
There are no more barriers to cross. All I have in common with the uncontrollable and the insane, the vicious and the evil, all the mayhem I have caused and my utter indifference toward it, I have now surpassed. My pain is constant and sharp, and I do not hope for a better world for anyone. In fact, I want my pain to be inflicted on others. I want no one to escape. But even after admitting this, there is no catharsis. My punishment continues to elude me, and I gain no deeper knowledge of myself. No new knowledge can be extracted from my telling. This confession has meant nothing.
Henry Cavill continues to ace it as Superman/Clark Kent. He's a little more seasoned at this time, and you can actually see more of the genuine pride he feels in being able to help people. While the reaction of everyone in Mexico does kind of unnerve him, when he's just walking with the young woman in his arms, you can see he's smiling. It made him happy to have helped this person. It made him happy to see the relief on her family's face that they didn't lose their child. Being good feels good. And I also like how Clark actually goes out of his way to go easy on people. When he first comes up to confront Lex, he literally says,
"Take you in without breaking you, which is more than you deserve."
When he starts the fight with Bruce, he tells him,
"Stay down! If I wanted it, you'd be dead already."
Hell, when Lex unleashes Doomsday, the first thing he does is block a punch that would have killed the little twerp. This guy literally just kidnapped his mom and tried to have her burned alive, and he still saves his ass. And moving over to the Clark Kent side of things, I like how for once we actually get to see Clark be a reporter. We see him talking to people about Batman. We see him asking people to come out and tell their story. We see him basically doing what Lois did in the last movie, and is still doing in this movie. He's not out hunting for the scoop that makes him famous. He's out to hear from people who are suffering and wants to improve their lives for the better. And back on the topic of Superman, while I don't care for the fact that Zack chose to kill him, I do like how it was executed. Clark deliberately takes the only weapon in the world that can kill him and uses it against the horrible monster created by technology from his world. And then this horrible beast pierces his body. And what does he do? Does he try to back out? Nope. He moves further down the spike to shove the spear deeper into the little bastard. He inflicts further injury to himself to make sure Doomsday dies, and thus to ensure that humanity is safe. This is why Superman is Superman, and everyone else is everyone else. Amy Adams continues to nail it as Lois Lane. She's not as feisty this time around, but she's every inch the brilliant reporter we saw in Man of Steel. I mean, literally the first thing we see her doing is asking a warlord if he's a terrorist. We see her cross-examine the literal United States Secretary of Defense. We see her ready to print a story against one of the richest, most powerful men in the world, and she doesn't give a flying fuck. Sue her or her employer. The truth needs to come out. And I like how we actually see her strength of character as well as her emotional vulnerability. I am by no means an expert on depictions of gender in entertainment, but I found that a lot of women in these types of stories are allowed to derive power and experience weakness because of the same thing. Lois isn't just scared by what she saw in Nairobi. She's completely traumatized by it. It's her entire motivation throughout the film to find out what the hell happened there. It's more than just proving Clark's innocence in a serious crime. It's about obtaining closure for that horrible thing that happened to her. You know, it's funny. When I first heard Gal Gadot was going to be Wonder Woman, I decided to watch the Fast and Furious movies to see what she was like in them, because I'd never seen her in anything before. And while I liked her in those movies, what kept bugging me was the fact that I got more of a Catwoman vibe off of her. And while I was watching the movie for my plot summary, I realized they kind of bait you into thinking she's Catwoman. They never say her name until she's getting off the plane, and you'd only really know if she's Diana if you saw any of the marketing in her press material. Like, say, I don't know, a freaking Blu-ray cover. But that aside, Gal really does a great job of playing the mysterious woman and the badass ancient warrior. She has a lot of charm and wisdom as Diana. She comes off like the sort of person who can talk her way out of any situation, but without coming off as slimy. She's kind of like a less eccentric version of the Doctor. You can feel their age and the wisdom that comes from that age, but they're not weighed down by it like some of the later versions of the Doctor. And as Wonder Woman, she's a force of nature. Or I'm going to save my talk about the action for a little bit later, but Gal sells the hell out of this Blood Knight kind of character. The now famous scene where Doomsday looks her back a few feet and she gets this excited smirk on her face. right before she reaches for her sword. She may not relish the idea of fighting, but once she's in the fire, she can't help but enjoy the heat. And while it seems that her line at the end about walking away from mankind has been retconned with the actual Wonder Woman film, it actually is still a good characterization. If the idea was that she fought for the entirety of the 19th century before calling it quits after World War I, then imagine seeing the world of 1812, the Napoleonic Wars, the Spanish-American War, the various Indian Wars in the United States, the Mexican-American War, the 100 Days War, the Russo-Japanese War, the Carlists Wars, the American Civil War, the Opium Wars, the Japanese Civil War, the Macedonian Struggle, the Boxer Rebellion, and so many other awful conflicts. And then here comes the so-called war to end all wars. And it's horrifying, but you think, okay, maybe these stupid humans are done murdering each other finally. And then World War II starts and you think, these people just can't change. So she quits on humanity. She decides they're not worth fighting for. But then she sees the news of this monster attacking Metropolis, and she realizes she doesn't have a choice. She has a choice here. Either she can just sit back and watch innocent people die when you know you could help, or go out and help these stupid humans again. Because knowing it's real means you gotta make a decision. 1, keep denying it, or 2, do something about it. And you know what she does? She does something about it. What I like about Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor is how much I fucking hate this guy. I've seen plenty of superhero movies in my day, and Jesse's Lex is the first supervillain that I've legitimately wanted to see die. There were villains who I wanted to see defeated or I thought should die, but Lex is the first one I've wanted to see die. I remember seeing this on a Friday in March 2016 with a bunch of my family. When I got to the scene where Lex tells Clark he's kidnapped his mother and will have her burned alive if he doesn't fight Batman, I literally whispered to my cousin, "Yeah, Superman, if you could just snap this guy's neck too, I don't think any of us would mind." But at the same time, despite my burning hatred for this guy, I also sympathize with him. I'm a person of religious convictions, as well as someone with somewhat of an antagonistic relationship with my own father. And I really appreciate what Lex says when he rambles on about how,
because God is tribal. God takes sides. No man in the sky intervened when I was a boy to deliver me from daddy's fist and abominations.
Imagine you're someone who heard all the time about God's immense love and compassion for all his children, and yet he never stopped your earthly father from hurting you, so you just decide he never did anything because he doesn't exist. And you move on with your life. And then emerges this all-powerful being who is every bit the compassionate onlooker, or who helps wherever he can, and you think, oh, so God does exist. It's just that I wasn't important enough to be saved. Well, that's great then. Imagine how much that would hurt. Imagine how much that would anger you. But even beyond that, I think this also contributed to a sense of misanthropy. If God doesn't care about me, then does he care about any of us? If he doesn't, then why should I? If he does care about us, then what makes everyone else more special than me? And this is why he summons whoever it is he summons from beyond Earth. He's killed God. Now he wants to take care of everyone else. His entire motivation boils down to a deep-seated hatred for God, which I think is one of the most interesting supervillains I've ever seen. And on top of that, I love how insidious this guy is. He's just a little troll. He literally tells Bruce he's going to plead insanity just so we can mock him when he gets away with the fact that he's murdered his friend. He literally tries to hurt the two women Clark loves the most just to get him to do whatever he wants him to do. He tricks a man who lost his legs into testifying to Congress just so he can kill him and a bunch of other people. And this is after he spent 18 months stealing the money from Wayne Tech's checks by sending them back to the company. This guy is a literal walking, talking opposition to basic human decency. He's basically a millennial version of Donald Trump. And I mean that in a good way. Jeremy Irons as Alfred is such a sassy bitch, and I love him. Every word out of his mouth either makes you giggle because he's snarking off at Batman.
Still working. You're getting slow in your old age, Alfred.
Comes to us all, Master Wayne. Even you got too old to die young. And not for lack of trying. Oh, I hope the next generation of Waynes won't inherit an empty wine cellar. Not that there's likely to be a next generation.
I can't stay down here, Alfred.
Go upstairs and socialize. Some young lady from Metropolis will make you honest. In your dreams, Alfred.
Or it makes you think about your life and how it affects others and how others affect it. Also, I like how he's constantly acting like Bruce's conscience. He keeps nagging him because, for all his smug certainty, Bruce knows he's wrong. Alfred keeps vocalizing it to remind him, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. Which is why you can't help but feel a little sliver of pride when you hear Alfred's voice on the Batplane after Batman's decided not only will he not kill Superman, but he's going out of his way to help him.
I don't deserve you, Alfred. No, sir, you don't.
I look forward to seeing more of these two in the next movie. Lawrence Fishburne returns as Perry White, and his role is pretty much the same as the last movie, but this time he's telling Clark no instead of telling Lois no. But what I like here is he still cares about Clark. Despite how much he makes fun of him, we see him fly all the way out to Kansas just to pay his respects to that nerd who cared so much about that stupid Batman. And when we see him looking over the paper, we don't see him focus on the headline. We see him turn the page to his fallen son. And the heaviness aside, he gets some of the best laughs in the movie. The phrase, in other news, water is wet, will never be the same thanks to Lawrence Fishburne in this role. Diane Lane continues to excel as Martha Kent. She continues to play the role with such warmth and affection, but this time she also gets to portray the fear of being kidnapped by a bunch of mysterious men with guns, and the horrible grief of having to bury your own son. Not as many scenes with her this time around, but Diane is still fantastic. Also, she gets another good laugh in the movie.
It's okay. I'm a friend of your son's.
I figured. The cape?
Kellen Mulvey doesn't do a ton as Anatoly, but hey, he's a cool henchman. He's sufficiently creepy and intimidating.
I'm afraid this is goodbye.
And every time we say goodbye, you die a little.
And makes for a decent heavy. Harry Lennox returns as now Secretary Swanwick. I didn't really talk about him much last time though, because while I liked him, he wasn't really that big of a character. Here though, he actually has a larger role that I find more worth talking about. He has a lot of professional respect for Lois, but there's no way in hell a guy in his position is going to run his mouth off to a reporter if she's just looking for another hot scoop. And even when he does decide to talk to her, he still says he won't make an on-the-record statement. He has an important job. He needs to prioritize what's worth letting out, what's worth using his name, and what's just not worth caring about. And like how despite the reservations about Superman's actions in this film and his entire existence in Man of Steel, he still respected the Man of Steel enough to stand at his funeral. Superman saved their planet 3 times over with his actions, and no matter what else he may have been, that deserves respect, and Swanwick knows it. I mentioned in my Sucker Punch review that Jenna Malone would be in this movie, which she is. She plays Jeanette Clyburn, Lois's contact at the DC Crime Lab, but she literally only has 2 scenes. Actually, come to think of it, it's funny that I teased her in my Sucker Punch review when I teased John Hamm for that movie in my Baby Driver review. It turned out he only had 2 short-ass scenes, too. Anywho, despite the size of her role, Jenna is still instantly likable as Jeanette, and she portrays her with the intelligence and mild eccentricity of a crime lab scientist. Nice work as always, Jenna. Great to have you. Robin Atkin Downes, an English voice actor who some of you might know as the voice of Cham Syndulla in Star Wars Rebels and Star Wars The Clone Wars, did the motion capture and creature vocals for Doomsday, and I personally think he did a really cool job. Doomsday moves like he's almost an infant, like he's just now learning how to move, which he is, I suppose. And I like how being alive almost seems painful for him. He's the thing that should not be. He's an abomination. No, not the abomination, an abomination. Things like Doomsday were outlawed because A, they're a bitch to kill, B, they want to kill everything else, and C, being alive is literally nothing but pain every single second with no other benefits. It's almost kind of sad when you think about it. I didn't talk about the costumes last time because, honestly, the Superman costume is kind of hard to fuck up. Even when it's made to be different, it's never that different. Like, if you compare the Man of Steel suit to the Superman Returns suit, you can tell they're both supposed to be the same freaking thing. They're both Superman. No big difference. Well, some difference, but nothing that big. But I'd actually like to talk about the Batman costume this time around, because with Batman, you have a character who's been adapted several times, and while I've always liked the suits from the Nolan films and even the first Tim Burton movie, it's never been quite the same as the suit from the comics. No filmmaker and costume designer before Zack and Michael Wilkinson and could ever find a way to make the classic gray suit with a black cape, cowl, boots and gloves with a golden belt work. But then Zack and Michael came on, and
I never thought I'd see it with my own eye.
Jesus Christ, this suit looks great. I mean, no disrespect to Lindy Hemming and Bob Ringwood, but Michael Wilkinson truly is cooler than will ever be. But of course, just giving was the most visually accurate Batsuit yet wasn't enough. Nah, fam, they had to go and give us the damn Dark Knight Returns power armor, and all I can say is...
yes. Just... yes. Yes!
And while we're on the topic of costumes, let's talk about the Wonder Woman suit. Save for Linda Carter's iconic series in the 1970s and Adrian Palicki's awful pilot from 2011, we've never really seen Wonder Woman on screen. And while Linda's costume was fine for its time and its production values, and Adrian's costume was... well, it wasn't her fault. She rocked it as best she could. Zack and Michael went above and beyond with this suit. It looks like practical armor, like the kind the real Spartans would have worn at the Battle of Thermopylae. And on top of that, it's the spitting image of the Wonder Woman suit. It's perhaps a bit more conservative than the traditional suit that we all know and love, But I dig it. I must say, I dig it quite a bit. I also love that they actually gave Gal's Wonder Woman actual weapons here, in addition to the famous lasso. I mean, she's a blasted Amazon warrior. Yeah, she can kick ass with a lasso, but you know what she could kick even more ass with? A sword and a shield. Nothing but respect like for my president, Michael Wilkinson. Damon Caro, once more, knocks it out of the damn park. The title fight is nice and fucking brutal. Every time Bruce or Clark gets knocked down, Ben and Henry's reactions sell the hell out of it. And the actual hits feel their weight. Every punch thrown feels like it had sucked to receive. Every time one of them throws the other across the room, you can tell that's gonna hurt. Really bad. This isn't a superhero brawl. This is a UFC fight. And then we move on to Batman's warehouse fight, which has all the positives I mentioned from the previous set piece, but what it lacks in the superpower joys, it makes up for with the immense joy of seeing all the Bat gadgets, as well as how Bruce handles being surrounded. This is Batman in his element. Paid mercs who are trained to kill quickly and effectively versus the goddamn Batman. Every fighter displays clear competence. That's the psycho in the bat suit is busy beating up one of your buddies. Shoot him in the fucking head. A guy stabs you. Sweet, now you've got another weapon to attack with. A moron tries to toss a grenade at you. You toss him before he can and throw it, and then laugh while it literally blows up in his face. Why? Because I'm Batman. And then you get to the end fight where we finally get to see the wonder that is Wonder Woman. And are also reminded why Superman is just so darn super. And Batman? Already showed how awesome he is. He's good. This is definitely the fight that most heavily relies on CGI over people actually punching other people, which is fine, honestly. I mean, unless Henry Cavill and Gal Gadot can actually fly and crush mountains with their bare hands, though that wouldn't surprise me, you can't even do half this stuff without CGI. It doesn't bother me, honestly. It never has. I really like the actual look of this movie. Larry Fong is back on for this movie, and I think he still has some JJ left in his system because I noticed a few lens flares here and there. I'm not sure why Zack and Larry came back together for this movie, but I have a hypothesis. Oh, it's you. What do you want? Hey, I saw Man of Steel, I really liked it. Sucks that not everyone did. Fans seem to like it. Yeah, they did. So I heard the Man of Steel sequel is gonna have Batman and Wonder Woman in it. That's pretty awesome. That's really awesome, man. Yeah, we're setting up for a Justice League movie. What? Oh my god, that's awesome, man. That's so awesome. I know, right? But what do you care? Listen, Zach. Last year I did a movie called Now You See Me. It was a nice shoot, no fuss, no muss, but what? Louis Leterrier he's a fine director, but he's He's just not you. I'm sorry for what I did. I should have talked to you before I did JJ's movie. I promise, if you take me back, I'll never cheat on you again. You're a visionary, Zack. No one can ever take your place, I swear. No one could ever, I swear. Do you mean that, Larry? Do you really mean that? Of course I mean it, Zack. Of course I mean it. And you promise you won't ever cheat on me again? I promise. I promise I won't ever do that again. I promise. I swear to God I won't. I promise, Zack, I promise. Do you want to shoot Batman vs. Superman with me? More than I've ever wanted to shoot anything in my life. You're hired. You're the best, baby. You're the absolute best. Either way, what I especially love about this movie is how there are frames of it that look like they were taken straight out of a comic book. I mean, Ben and Henry are basically what you'd get if a Jim Lee drawing and an Alex Cross painting came to life. And Gaul is basically what would have inspired those famous Italian Renaissance paintings. But speaking of Renaissance paintings, I've actually seen lots of people point out the visual comparisons between certain shots of this movie and classical art. Off the top of my head, there's a rear shot of Lex staring at the sunset across from the Gotham and Metropolis Bay, compared with this painting of Napoleon looking at the ocean during sunset. And there's Superman being pulled down from Doomsday's hand, like Jesus being taken down from the cross after his crucifixion. Even if you don't like this movie, you have to admit, this looks beautiful. Just beautiful. The score by Hans Zimmer and Junkie XL is absolutely incredible. I mean, first off, you have the Lex Luthor theme with those weird, offbeat piano chords. And then it ends with those amazing violins that you hear when he says that his painting should be upside down. And then you have Is She With You? What is perhaps Zimmer's Mona Lisa, his Citizen Kane, his
Breaking Bad Season 5.
Sure, that too. First you got Tina Guo's kick-ass electric cello solo, and then you add in those epic tribal drums straight out of Mad Max Fury Road. And then you have Junkie's new Batman theme, which admittedly is not as memorable as the first two tracks in my opinion, but it's kind of hard to be as hooky as Tina's cello. Oh, and either way, this is still pretty great. It also continues this universe's trend and emphasizing percussion. Well, the drums in the Superman theme are more rhythmic and give a feeling of triumph and confidence. The drums on this track just fill you with rage, like you're ready to go. I want to pick a fight with someone. Elfman's theme back in '89 was about evoking the feeling of this mysterious gothic hero. Jones and James Newton Howard's theme for the Nolan trilogy was something that left you with a feeling of determination. It was driving, and it made you think about your actions in a way that made you want to make sure you did things correctly with precision. Chunky's theme, though, is all about those metal clangs with those much more brutal horns. It just shouts, "Get out of my way!" Which is perfect for Ben Affleck's Batman in this movie. This is a Batman who's come to the point where he just wants to hurt people. Well, he wants to punish evil instead of protect the innocent, and I goddamn love it. The new Batmobile is one bad bitch. The tumble from the Nolan trilogy was a thing of beauty. The only thing that could stop that thing was a shot from an RPG. But Snyder's Batmobile got T-boned by Superman and had a ship dropped on it. It had a fishing boat dropped on it. And she kept on ticking.
Beautiful.
This movie has the single most important frame in any Batman movie since this character first appeared on movie screens. In the opening credits, when Bruce falls into that hole in the ground, we see it right here. Batman, created by Bob Kane and Bill Finger. Batman 1966 never credited Bill. Batman 1989 and Batman Returns never credited Bill. Batman Forever and Batman and Robin didn't credit Bill. Batman Begins, The Dark Knight, and The Dark Knight Rises never credited Bill. You know what movie did credit him, though? It was Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice. The co-creator of Batman, and there's plenty to debate about that co-part, let's be honest here, finally gets the credit that he deserves after 77 years. The only shame here is that this is the first Batman movie in 8 years not to make $1 billion. Because after being shafted for 77 goddamn years, Bill's family deserves to run Time Warner and DC Comics dry with their well overdue royalties. Cons. I don't like that Zack decided to kill Clark. I respect it as a bold decision, and I realize that he's coming back in Justice League. And in all honesty, I don't think it's a problem for this particular story. Clark has spent the entire movie doubting his place in the world, and he decides that it doesn't ultimately matter if the world will ever love him. He loves it, and he'll happily die for it. What I don't like about it is that, in my mind, it's just one more plot thread for Justice League, which I think needs as few threads as possible. I trust Zack's vision 110%, and I mean, at this point, I've seen enough of his work to know that whatever he has in mind, it's going to be pretty good. But if I was a producer on this movie, I would have tried hard to steer Zack away from this particular idea and come up with something a little better. I don't really dislike the scene of Diana watching the footage of Flash, Aquaman, and Cyborg, but I'd be lying if I said I thought that it needed to be here for the story. You could have just cut away once Diana saw Bruce send her the picture from Lex's drive. I've heard some people try to explain why the scene actually works, and while I respect them and what they had to say, I'm not sure I necessarily can agree. The scene only exists to tease Justice League, which isn't a knock against Zack because I'm excited as hell for Justice League, but with all due respect, in my mind, if you have a scene that's just there to tease the next movie, the time spent on that scene could have been better served on a different scene about the movie you're already making and I'm already watching. That's just my opinion, though. I mean, this whole video is my opinion, but you know what I mean. When I heard the sequel to Man of Steel was going to have Batman in it, I was excited as hell. When I heard that the movie was going to have Wonder Woman and a new Lex Luthor, I was even more excited. And when I actually saw the movie for the first time, I was left a little bit cold. Not because I disliked the movie, but because I only liked it when I was hoping to love it. And I think that's because I expected a movie that was very action-heavy, but instead, I got more or less a political drama about Superman that featured a very action-heavy third act. I expected a movie where Batman befriended Superman after he showed him how to live without hate. But instead, I got a movie where Batman decides to honor Superman after he sacrificed himself for a world that hated him. I expected a movie where Lex Luthor arranged the Batman vs. Superman fight because he wanted to see his two enemies extinguish each other. But instead, he either wanted Batman to kill Superman to prove that Superman was in fact killable, or Superman to kill Batman to prove that Superman wasn't as good as everyone thought he was. I didn't really have any thoughts about what Lois would do in this movie, but then I saw the movie, and I found out that she was probably the third most important character in the movie. This isn't the movie that I wanted to see at first, but in hindsight, I'm glad it's the movie we got, because it is fantastic.
Absolutely fantastic.
I'm going to give Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice a 4.5 out of 5. Okay, wow. We're done here. Now I just need to see one more movie and our adventure will have ended. Thank you as always for watching. I hope you enjoyed this review. And if you did, please like and subscribe for more content. If you agreed or disagreed with my review, or just had a funny thought occur to you while you were watching, leave a comment and try to start a discussion. And remember to come back around for when I finally review Justice League. Woodstock out.